The Unseen Caller, Episode 1, the first call. Emily Carter had always believed in logic. A world that functioned on cause and effect, on rationality, on things that could be explained. That was before she received the call. It was 2:34 a.m. when her phone rang, pulling her from a restless sleep. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the charging cable on her nightstand. She groggily reached for her phone, squinting at the screen. Incoming call, Emily Carter. She sat up instantly, her heart hammering against her ribs. That couldn't be right. Her own number. How the hell was she calling herself? A glitch? A prank? The phone buzzed in her hands. Answer or decline? She hesitated, the air in her bedroom suddenly thick and suffocating. Finally, curiosity won over fear. She swiped right and put the phone to her ear. Hello. Her voice was hoarse, still thick with sleep. Static crackled through the line, followed by a deep, shaky breath. Then, a whisper. Emily, don't go outside. She froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was hers. It was her own voice on the other end of the call. What? Who is this? A distorted gasp, then the voice continued, more frantic now. Listen to me. Don't go outside. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, stay inside. You don't understand what's happening, but you need to trust me. The line went dead. Emily sat motionless, the silence in her room stretching out, pressing against her skull. Her own voice. She had just spoken to herself. That wasn't possible. A sharp knock at the door made her nearly drop the phone. Her head snapped toward the apartment door. A single knock, then silence. Then another. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, rhythmic. Her stomach churned. Her building had security. No one should be able to get in this late. Her phone screen lit up again. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello. A low, distorted whisper slithered through the line. You didn't listen. A click. Silence. Emily's breath came in short gasps. The air felt wrong, as if something unseen had shifted in her reality. Then her phone vibrated again, this time, a message notification. She tapped the screen with trembling fingers. Message from unknown, look through the peephole. Her body screamed no, but her feet carried her forward, her breath shaky as she pressed her eye against the small circular glass. The hallway outside her apartment was empty. Then the lights flickered, just for a second. And in that brief moment, she saw him. A man in a dark hoodie, standing motionless, directly in front of her door. His head was bowed, his hands at his sides. He wasn't knocking anymore. He was just standing there. The lights flickered again. And this time, when the hallway went dark for a fraction of a second, he was closer. Emily stumbled backward, her heart pounding like a war drum. The knocking resumed, louder this time. Harder. She scrambled to her bedroom, locked the door, and pressed her back against it, trying to control her breathing. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Message from unknown, you have until 2:34 a.m. tomorrow. Emily didn't sleep that night. The Unseen Caller, Episode 2, the man in the camera. Emily Carter didn't sleep. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. The fear sat heavy in her chest, pressing down with every breath. Every shadow in the room seemed darker, every sound sharper, every second stretching unbearably long. She had never felt so trapped in her own home, so aware of the thin walls between herself and the unknown presence outside. Not even for a second. The weight of the night pressed against her chest, every creak in the apartment making her flinch. The message kept replaying in her mind. You have until 2:34 a.m. tomorrow. She sat curled on her couch, phone gripped tight in her hand, her heart hammering with every passing second. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt charged, like the air before a storm. As dawn broke, the world outside her window carried on as if nothing had happened. People walking their dogs, delivery trucks passing by. Normal. But her world had changed. She needed answers. The camera photographed by mid-morning, Emily found herself standing at the building's security office. The overnight guard, a bored-looking man in his 50s, barely glanced at her as she explained she needed to see the camera footage from last night. "Miss, we don't share security footage with tenants. If there was an incident, you need to file a report." Emily took a deep breath, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Listen, I think someone tried to break into my apartment last night. I just need to see the footage from the hallway outside my door." The guard sighed, scratching his chin. "You got a police report?" She hesitated. What would she tell them? That her own voice from the future called her and told her not to open the door? That she saw a shadowy figure that got closer every time the lights flickered? I just need to check something," she said, lowering her voice. "Please." Maybe it was the desperation in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he had nothing better to do. But with a groan, he turned to the screen and clicked through the archived footage. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the video loaded. Timestamp, 2:34 a.m. The dim overhead light cast a sterile glow over the security footage, making the shadows seem deeper, more ominous. The grainy video flickered slightly, distorting the edges of the frame like an old VHS tape struggling to keep its clarity. Emily felt her pulse quicken as she leaned closer, gripping the edge of the desk. The air in the security room felt thick, stifling, as if the walls were closing in on her. At first, there was nothing. The hallway was empty. Then, just as she remembered, the lights flickered. And there he was. The man in the hoodie stood perfectly still, right in front of her door. His head was slightly tilted downward, hands at his sides. He didn't move. Didn't knock. Just stood there. Emily's stomach churned. But then something changed, something she hadn't seen last night. The security camera glitched for half a second. And in that half second, when the feed returned, the man's head was turned staring directly at the camera. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching. The guard let out a low whistle. Creepy as hell. Emily swallowed hard. Keep playing it? The footage resumed. The hallway remained empty. No man. No knocking. But at exactly 2:36 a.m., something flickered on the screen. A shape. Just for a fraction of a second. Emily's blood ran cold as she leaned in, rewinding the footage, pausing at the exact moment. The figure was inside her apartment. Emily's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. A cold shiver crawled down her spine, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. Her mind screamed at her to look away, to deny what she was seeing, but she couldn't. Her own reflection in the screen mirrored her horror-stricken expression, frozen in place as the realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. Someone had been inside. Standing right behind her. Watching. Right behind her. The Unseen Caller, Episode 3, The Lost File. Emily Carter couldn't shake the image from her mind, the shadowy figure inside her apartment, standing behind her in the security footage. Her breath hitched, her chest tightening as if invisible hands were squeezing the air from her lungs. A cold sweat prickled at her skin, and her fingers curled into trembling fists. She could still feel the phantom presence behind her, the weight of unseen eyes lingering even now. The room felt too small, the walls too close. She had always felt safe in her home until now. It was impossible, yet there it was, captured on video. The air in the security room had felt suffocating, but nothing compared to the terror now clenching around her ribs. She forced herself to breathe, to think. If there was proof that something had been in her apartment, then there had to be more answers. The footage had been recorded. It was real. Which meant she could figure this out. She had to. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, scrolling to her call history. A deep unease settled in her chest, whispering that she was being watched even now. What if answering the call had already changed something? What if calling back would make it worse? Her thumb hovered over the number, hesitating. Every rational part of her screamed to stop, to put the phone down, but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, pushed her forward. The incoming call from her own number at 2:34 a.m. was still there, an undeniable anomaly staring her in the face. Her thumb hovered over the number. Should she try calling it back? A notification popped up at the top of her screen before she could decide. New message from unknown, you're looking in the wrong place. A fresh wave of fear twisted in her gut. She glanced at the security guard, still watching the footage, oblivious to the panic gripping her. Her instincts screamed at her to stop. To walk away. But she couldn't. She needed to know. She texted back, her hands unsteady. Who are you? 3 dots appeared. Then, a response. It started 15 years ago. Search for her. Emily frowned. 15 years ago? Search for who? She glanced at the security guard. Can I check something else? The records from this building. From 15 years ago. The guard gave her a skeptical look but sighed. We don't keep old footage that long. You'd have to check with building management. But he paused, frowning. There was a missing person case from around that time. Some girl. Lived in your unit, I think. Emily's blood turned to ice. She swallowed. Do you remember her name? The guard shook his head. Nah, but I bet it's in the old tenant files. You could check with the leasing office. Emily nodded, muttered a thank you, and hurried out of the security office. She didn't stop until she reached the elevator, her mind racing. A missing girl. In her apartment. 15 years ago. Her phone buzzed again. She flinched, nearly dropping it as a jolt of fear shot through her. Her pulse quickened, each beat hammering against her ribs as she forced herself to look at the screen. The cold sweat on her palms made it harder to grip, and for a split second, she hesitated, terrified of what she might see next. Unknown, you don't have much time. Emily stepped into the elevator, her pulse pounding. She was starting to think she never had time to begin with. The Unseen Caller, Episode 4, Looped Fate. Emily Carter gripped her phone tighter, her heartbeat a violent drum against her ribs. Her breath hitched, coming in short, shallow gasps as an icy chill spread through her limbs. A shudder ran down her spine, the kind that made her skin prickle as if unseen eyes were crawling over her. Her fingers tightened around the device, knuckles turning white, as the weight of fear settled deep into her bones. The message glared at her from the screen. Unknown, you don't have much time. The weight of those words pressed down on her like a lead blanket. She wanted to dismiss it as another cruel joke, another anomaly in a nightmarish series of events, but the fear curling in her stomach told her otherwise. This wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. The elevator door slid open with a chime, and Emily stepped out into the lobby, the sterile glow of fluorescent lights doing little to ease the gnawing dread in her chest. She had one destination, the leasing office. If someone had lived in her unit 15 years ago and had gone missing, there had to be a record of it. She reached the office, knocking twice before pushing the door open. An older woman sat behind a cluttered desk, glasses perched at the end of her nose as she typed on an ancient computer. She looked up, offering a thin smile. Can I help you? Emily hesitated, then took a deep breath. I was wondering if you had any tenant records from 15 years ago. Specifically for my unit. The woman raised an eyebrow. 15 years? That's quite a while back. We don't usually keep files that long, but... She turned to a rusted filing cabinet in the corner, pulling it open with some effort. What's your unit number? 305. The woman flipped through yellowed folders, fingers dancing over names that meant nothing to Emily until she stopped. A flicker of recognition crossed her face as she pulled out a file and laid it on the desk. Sophie Carter, she murmured, glancing up at Emily. Any relation? Emily's stomach lurched. Carter. Her last name. She swallowed hard. I don't think so. What happened to her? The woman hesitated, then sighed. She went missing. Police came, did their investigations, but nothing ever came of it. It was like she vanished into thin air. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Just, gone. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached for the file. A grainy black and white photo of Sophie stared back at her. She almost dropped it. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, the world tilted around her. Her fingers went numb, slick with cold sweat, as if reality itself was slipping through them. The pounding in her ears drowned out every other sound in the room. Her mind screamed for an explanation, but there was none. This was impossible, yet the proof was staring right at her. The girl in the photo looked just like her. Not similar. Identical. A cold chill ran down her spine. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, and she nearly yelped. Pulling it out with shaking hands, she saw another message. Unknown, now you understand. The room seemed to shrink around her. This was impossible. A trick. Some kind of elaborate hoax. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't the first Emily Carter. And if she didn't figure out what was happening, she wouldn't be the last. The cycle was endless, an invisible thread pulling her toward an inescapable fate. She was next in line. Unseen Caller, Episode 5. The night it happened, Emily Carter stood frozen, the air in the leasing office thick with something she couldn't name. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly, casting a sickly glow over the space. The hum of a distant printer and the occasional murmur of voices from the hallway barely registered in her mind. Everything around her felt distorted, like she was seeing it through fogged glass. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating, pressing against her lungs as a deep unease settled in her bones. The weight of the file in her trembling hands felt unbearable, its truth pressing down on her like an avalanche. Sophie Carter. A missing girl from 15 years ago. Her exact face staring back at her from the grainy black and white photo. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was her. Her breath shuddered as she closed the file, her fingers ghosting over the edges of the brittle paper. The leasing agent Margaret, as her desk nameplate read, watched her closely, curiosity and concern flickering behind her thick-rimmed glasses. "Are you all right, dear?" Margaret asked gently. Emily forced a nod, though her entire body was rebelling. "Yeah. Just a strange coincidence." Margaret hesitated, as if she wanted to say something else, but nodded. "Let me know if you need anything else." Emily barely mumbled a thank you before hurrying out of the office, the cold air outside hitting her like a slap. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She fumbled with her phone, her pulse a frantic drum beat beneath her skin as she typed into the search bar, "Sophie Carter missing case, 15 years ago." The results loaded instantly. News articles, archived police reports, old forum discussions. And there, in bold black letters, one headline made her knees nearly give out beneath her. "Missing woman's final call, something is coming for me." Emily's breath caught. She tapped the link, and an old, pixelated news article opened. April 17, 2009, New York authorities continue the search for missing resident Sophie Carter, 24, who was last seen in her apartment at 305 Westfield Avenue. Friends reported receiving frantic calls from Carter in the early hours of the morning, during which she claimed that someone or something was trying to reach her through her own phone. The final recorded call from Carter's phone, placed at 2:34 a.m., was described as incoherent. Investigators confirmed she had dialed her own number just minutes before she disappeared. She said she could see herself outside the door, said one friend, who asked to remain anonymous. She told me she was scared. That she didn't think she was supposed to exist anymore. No signs of forced entry were found. Carter's apartment was locked from the inside. Her phone was found on the living room floor, the call log wiped clean except for one final entry, incoming call, Sophie Carter. Emily's vision blurred as a wave of nausea rolled over her. 2:34 a.m. The exact time she had received the call from herself. She clenched her phone, her breath shallow, erratic. This was real. Whatever had happened to Sophie to her was happening again. A cycle. A loop. And it was about to happen to her next. Her phone buzzed in her palm. She flinched, nearly dropping it as a surge of ice-cold fear shot through her veins. Her pulse pounded against her skull, drowning out the distant noise of the city around her. The device felt heavier, as if the message waiting for her carried an unbearable weight. Her breath came in quick, uneven gasps as she hesitated, her fingers slick with sweat before she finally forced herself to look at the screen. Unknown, you're running out of time. Emily's heart lurched into her throat. She didn't know what would happen when the clock struck 2:34 a.m. again, but one thing was certain, she had less than 24 hours to stop it. If she failed, she wouldn't just disappear, she would become another forgotten echo, another ghost in the cycle. Whatever had taken Sophie would take her next, and this time, there would be no one left to remember she ever existed. The Unseen Caller, Episode 6. The final warning. The city buzzed around Emily Carter, but she heard nothing. The honking cars, the murmur of passing conversations, the rhythmic clicking of someone's high heels on the pavement, all of it faded into white noise as her pulse thundered in her ears. She had less than 24 hours. The words from the article burned in her mind. Sophie Carter, 24 years old. Last seen in her apartment at 2:34 a.m. Final call, her own number. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It wasn't some bizarre coincidence. It was a pattern. And she was next. Her breath came shallow and fast as she turned a corner, ducking into a coffee shop. The walls of the city felt like they were pressing in on her, an invisible force tracking her every move. She needed a moment to think. To plan. Sliding into a seat at the back, she pulled out her phone, staring at the last message from unknown. You're running out of time. She hesitated before typing a reply. What happens at 2:34 a.m.? Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then another. The screen remained silent. No response. A chill crept down her spine. Whatever was behind this wanted her to figure it out herself. Her gaze drifted out the window, unfocused, lost in thought. She needed information. More than what the internet could give her. If Sophie Carter had lived in her apartment before, somebody had to remember her. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number she hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a voice picked up. Emily. A lump formed in her throat. Mom. Honey, what's wrong? You sound. Her mother hesitated. Are you okay? Emily swallowed hard. Did Dad ever mention another Carter in the family? A Sophie Carter? Silence. A static kind of pause that made Emily's skin prickle. Then, finally, "Why are you asking about her?" Her breath hitched. "So you do know her?" A sigh. Then a rustling, like her mother was moving to a quieter space. "Emily, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Stop looking into this. Let it go." "What?" "Mom, no, listen to me." Her mother's voice trembled now, more urgent than Emily had ever heard it. "I don't know how you found out, but whatever you do, don't answer your phone tonight. Do you understand me? If you hear it ring, don't answer it." Emily's stomach twisted. "Mom, what's going on?" But the line went dead. Her hand shook as she pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the blank screen. Her mother had never sounded so afraid. Never. And then, as if the universe itself was mocking her, her phone buzzed again. "Unknown, you won't make it to morning." Emily's blood ran cold. The night begins. Emily didn't know how long she sat there, staring at her phone as the message burned into her mind. The cafe around her felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater. "You won't make it to morning." The word slithered through her thoughts, tightening around her like a noose. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table, nails digging into the cheap laminate. Panic clawed at her throat. She had less than a night to figure out what was happening, to break whatever cycle had started long before she ever set foot in her apartment. She needed help. Someone who wouldn't call her crazy. Someone who might actually believe her. She scrolled through her contacts, hesitating before tapping a name. James. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Emily. Hey, it's been a while, James. I need you to come over. Right now." A pause. "Are you okay? You sound. I'll explain everything when you get here. Please." She could hear the concern in his voice. "All right. I'm on my way." Emily exhaled shakily, pocketing her phone. James was an old friend, someone who had been in her life long enough to trust. If there was anyone who could help her make sense of this, it was him. 2 hours until midnight. James arrived at her apartment looking worried. "Emily, what's going on? You sounded. Just come inside. I'll tell you everything." She locked the door behind him, double-checking the deadbolt. The tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "Okay," James said, folding his arms. "Start from the beginning." Emily took a deep breath. I think something is going to happen to me at 2:34 a.m. James frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before pulling up the news article, sliding the phone toward him. He read in silence, his expression darkening with every line. When he finally looked up, there was something new in his eyes, something close to fear. "Emily, this isn't possible." "I know. But it's happening. And I don't know how to stop it." James ran a hand through his hair. "What about the calls? Have you tried tracing them?" "They don't trace to anything," she whispered. "It's like they don't exist." The room fell into uneasy silence. Then James said, "What if you don't stay here tonight? Go somewhere else." Emily's stomach twisted. The cycle repeats no matter what. It's not about the apartment. It's about me. James exhaled sharply. "Then we need a plan." 30 minutes to 2:34 a.m. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the kitchen light. James sat across from Emily, a baseball bat resting beside him. It wasn't much, but it was something. Emily's hands trembled as she checked her phone. The clock read 2:03 a.m. "Whatever happens, I don't answer the phone," she whispered. "That's what my mom said." James nodded. "Then we don't. We wait." Silence stretched between them. Every sound outside, every creak of the building, every distant car horn felt like an omen. Then, At exactly 2:34 a.m., Emily's phone rang. She sucked in a breath. The screen glowed, displaying two words that made her blood turn to ice. Incoming call, Emily Carter. James paled. Don't answer it. Emily's hands clenched into fists, the air in the apartment growing unbearably thick. The ringing didn't stop. It grew louder, the sound distorting, warping. The lights flickered. A deep hum vibrated through the air, something pressing against reality itself. And then a knock at the door. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. James grabbed the bat. Emily, her phone screen glitched. The reflection in the black glass shimmered. And there in the distorted reflection was herself. But it wasn't her. Not really. The knocking came again. James gritted his teeth. Whatever you do, don't open that door. Emily wasn't sure she had a choice. The Unseen Caller, Episode 7, the other side. The knocks echoed through the apartment like gunshots. 3 precise, deliberate thuds. James gripped the baseball bat so tightly his knuckles turned white. Emily sat frozen, staring at the phone in her hand as it continued to ring. Her name glowed on the screen. Incoming call, Emily Carter. Her own voice had warned her. Don't answer. But now, something was waiting outside her door, knocking in perfect rhythm. The apartment lights flickered. The air grew heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. The shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, and the temperature in the room dropped. James shot her a look. Emily, whatever you do, don't. Another knock. This time, the door handle twisted. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. The phone continued to ring, the sound warping, distorting, as if something on the other side of reality was forcing its way through. The call was no longer just a noise, it was a presence. Her reflection on the screen wavered, twisting into something wrong. James inched toward the door. Who's there? Silence. Then, a whisper. Let me in. Emily's breath caught. The voice was hers. Not just similar. Identical. James' eyes widened, and he took a step back. No. Nope. We're not doing this. The phone stopped ringing. The silence that followed was worse. Then, the knocking resumed, but now it wasn't just at the door. It was coming from inside the walls. Emily's stomach twisted. James' a low hum vibrated through the floor. The apartment trembled, as if reality itself was unraveling. Then, the lights went out. The threshold darkness swallowed the apartment. The only illumination came from the phone's screen, casting a sickly glow onto Emily's face. James' breathing was fast, shallow. Emily, he whispered. Do not move. A creak sounded near the door. James swung the bat. Nothing. The sound was coming from everywhere now. The walls, the ceiling, beneath the floorboards. Something was in the apartment with them. Emily clutched the phone. Her hands were ice cold. We have to get out of here. James didn't need convincing. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward the front door, but the door was gone. The entryway they had walked through just an hour ago was now a solid wall. Emily's breath hitched. What the hell? A sharp click behind them. They spun around. The bathroom door was open. Emily's stomach clenched. She knew they hadn't left it open. James exhaled sharply. Nope. We are not going in there. The knocking stopped. A single message flashed onto Emily's phone. Unknown, step through. James grabbed her arm. Emily, no. Whatever's happening, we don't play its game. Emily was shaking. But deep down, she knew they weren't being given a choice. Something wanted her to cross the threshold. And if she didn't, it would come for her instead. The other side. Emily took a breath and stepped forward. James cursed but followed close behind. The moment they crossed into the bathroom, the door slammed shut behind them. The mirror flickered and their reflections were gone. Emily's heart pounded. The room shifted, the air thick with something ancient, something wrong. The floor seemed to breathe beneath their feet. Then a new reflection appeared. But it wasn't them. It was her. Sophie Carter. Looking directly at Emily. Her expression was hollow, empty, her mouth moving in soundless words. The bathroom around her was different, distorted, dark, like a reflection from a world just out of sync with theirs. Then Sophie lifted her hand, pointing behind Emily. Emily turned. A shadow stood in the doorway. Watching. A twisted version of herself. And it smiled. The mirror shattered. The escape glass exploded outward, sending shards flying through the air. Emily and James stumbled back as the room shifted again, reality snapping back into place. The apartment was still. Silent. The front door was back where it should be. James was the first to speak. "We're leaving. Right now." Emily didn't argue. They rushed out of the apartment, running down the hallway, not stopping until they were outside in the cold night air. Emily's phone buzzed one last time. "Unknown, you stepped through. Now it sees you." Her hands shook as she looked at James. "It's not over." James swallowed hard. "Then we fight." The Unseen Caller, Episode 8, The Replacement. Emily Carter's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as she and James ran down the darkened streets, the city around them a blur. The air was thick with something unnatural, something watching. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward them, every flickering streetlight cast twisted shapes onto the pavement. Her phone was still clutched in her hand, the final message from unknown glaring at her like a warning carved in stone: "You stepped through. Now it sees you." James grabbed her wrist, yanking her around a corner into a dimly lit alley. "Okay, we need to stop for a second. What the hell just happened back there?" Emily pressed herself against the brick wall, sucking in deep lungfuls of air. Her hands were trembling. "I don't know. I think we just crossed into something we weren't supposed to. That thing. That version of me in the mirror, it was real. And Sophie, she was trying to tell me something." James ran a hand through his hair, his face tight with frustration. "None of this should be real. You know that, right?" "Yeah? Well, tell that to my reflection." Emily's voice was sharp, but panic bled through every word. James exhaled, trying to steady himself. "Okay. So what do we do?" Because whatever that was, it didn't seem like the kind of thing that just lets people walk away. Emily stared at her phone screen, at the name that haunted her. Sophie Carter. "We need to find out what happened to her." James looked unconvinced. "We already know. She disappeared." Emily met his eyes. "No. She didn't disappear. She was replaced." The hunt for the truth. The dim glow of the library's reading lamps cast long, trembling shadows as Emily and James pored over old microfilm archives. The musty scent of aged paper filled the air, the occasional rustle of turning pages the only sound breaking the silence. Emily scrolled through reels of old newspapers, her fingers tight on the machine's crank. Each page flickered past in grayscale flashes of forgotten history. Then she found it. A blurry photo of Sophie Carter. The headline sent an ice-cold weight dropping into her stomach. Missing woman found dead, or was she? James leaned in, reading over her shoulder. April 20th, 2009, New York, NY. 3 days after her disappearance, authorities discovered Sophie Carter in her apartment. Despite initial reports that she had vanished, police found her alive, dazed, disoriented, but physically unharmed. However, neighbors insisted the woman in the apartment was not Sophie Carter. She looked like Sophie, she talked like Sophie, but that wasn't her, said one source, who asked to remain anonymous. Something about her eyes. They were wrong. Sophie's close friends reported she seemed different after her return, detached, hollow. Within a week, she was gone again. This time, for good. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She came back. But it wasn't her. James sat back, exhaling sharply. So that's what we're dealing with. Something takes people, uses them like placeholders. Emily swallowed hard. And it's coming for me. 2 a.m., the final night back at Emily's apartment, every sound felt amplified: the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. James stood by the door, gripping the baseball bat again. We're not letting this happen. We keep the lights on. We stay together. And no matter what, you do not answer your phone. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the device in her lap as if it were a live grenade. What if it doesn't matter? What if it already knows I'm here? James didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. It did. 2:34 a.m., the call. The moment the clock struck 2:34, the air shifted. A deep hum vibrated through the apartment, making the windows tremble. The walls seemed to breathe. Shadows stretched unnaturally, pooling in the corners like something was pressing through from the other side. And then the phone rang. Incoming call, Emily Carter. James clenched his jaw. Don't answer it. Emily's hands curled into fists. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But something else happened. The screen of the phone glitched, the text warping, shifting into something new. Answer or someone else will. And then the knocking began. The final choice. Emily stood, her entire body locking up as the knocking continued. But this time, it wasn't at the front door. It was inside the apartment. James' grip on the bat tightened. Where's it coming from? Emily didn't answer. Because she already knew. Slowly, her head turned toward the bathroom door. The knob twisted. James took a step back. Emily, don't. But she was already moving, as if something else was pulling her forward. Her feet barely felt like her own. Her fingers closed around the handle and she opened it. The bathroom was dark. Silent. But the mirror was wrong. It no longer reflected the bathroom at all. Instead, it showed something else, a room just like hers, but empty. Dark. Hollow. And standing in the center of it was her. Emily's chest tightened. It was her face. Her clothes. But the eyes, they weren't hers. The other Emily tilted her head. And then, it smiled. Then, she raised a hand and knocked on the other side of the glass. A sharp pain exploded in Emily's skull. She stumbled back as the world blurred, the hum in the air turning into a deafening roar. James' voice sounded distant. Emily. Don't look at it. But it was too late. The mirror shattered. And the lights went out. The aftermath: when Emily woke, the sun was rising. James was slumped in a chair beside her, eyes wide with exhaustion. You're awake. Emily blinked, her body aching. What happened? James hesitated. It just stopped. After the mirror broke. The phone stopped ringing. The knocking ended. Emily sat up slowly. The apartment was the same. Familiar. Real. But something felt off. She turned to James, her voice barely a whisper. What if it didn't stop? What if it just finished what it was trying to do? James swallowed hard, as if afraid to ask. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Because deep down, she knew. She had won. She had survived. But the question remained, was she still Emily Carter? Scene Caller, Episode 9, the first call. Again the morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden hues across the apartment. Everything was still. Too still. Emily Carter sat upright on the couch, the weight in her chest pressing down harder than it should. James was still watching her, his expression careful, studying her as if she were something fragile. Or something dangerous. "How do you feel?" he asked. Emily swallowed. Her throat felt dry. "I don't know." James exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. "That's not exactly reassuring." She turned her gaze toward the shattered fragments of the bathroom mirror still scattered across the floor. The memory of the other her standing in the reflection sent a shudder crawling down her spine. It was gone. The calls had stopped. The knocking had ceased. But something deep in her bones told her this wasn't over. Not yet. She pressed her palms against her face, exhaling slowly. "What time is it?" James checked his phone. 7:12 a.m. She nodded, almost to herself. Okay. Okay, then it's over. Right. James hesitated, looking at her for a long time before answering. "Yeah," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "It's over." Emily wanted to believe that. But the moment she stood up, the world tilted. A sharp ringing filled her ears, piercing and shrill. The apartment blurred, the walls shifting like rippling water. Her stomach clenched, and suddenly she wasn't standing in her apartment anymore. She was back. Back in the dark. Back in the moment before it all began. "The loop," Emily gasped as she stumbled forward, her hands catching against a familiar wooden nightstand. The dim glow of her charging phone illuminated the room. She knew this place. Her apartment. But not now. Before. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she turned toward the clock on the nightstand. 2:33 a.m. No, 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 Emily whispered, staggering backward. It wasn't over. It had never been over. She was back at the beginning. Her phone vibrated. Once. Twice. 3 times. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it away, praying this was just a hallucination, a nightmare. But when she opened them, her phone was ringing. And on the screen, those same 2 words glowed in the darkness: "Incoming call, Emily Carter." The second chance she froze. The same decision lay before her again. But now, she knew what was waiting on the other side. The knocking hadn't started yet. The air was still. The moment was fragile, as if time itself was waiting to see what she would do. What if she didn't answer? James had warned her. Her mother had warned her. She had warned herself. But what if ignoring it meant something worse? What if the real trap wasn't answering but running? Her finger hovered over the decline button, her pulse a wild, frantic drumbeat. "Think, Emily. Think." Then, another vibration. New message from unknown: "This is your only way out." Her breath caught. What? The phone continued ringing. The screen flickered. Something was changing. Then the first knock at the door. Emily's body tensed. The second knock followed, deliberate. Rhythmic. She had seconds to decide. Answer. Or don't. Her shaking hand moved on its own. And she answered. The other and static crackled through the line. A low hum vibrated against her skull. Then, her own voice, breathless, urgent, afraid. "Emily, listen to me. You have to end this. You have to break the cycle. Emily's throat tightened. How? It doesn't want you to know. That's why it keeps pulling you back. Because you're getting too close. The knocking grew louder. More desperate. I don't understand. Emily choked out. If this is a loop, then how do I stop it? Silence. Then, her own voice whispered, you have to replace it? The call ended. And the door burst open. The confrontation. Emily stumbled backward as a dark figure stepped into the room. It was her. But not just a reflection, not just a shadow. A version of her that didn't belong. The other Emily's head tilted, eyes hollow, that same chilling smile stretching across her face. It's time. Emily's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. No. Not this time. The words from the call burned in her mind. You have to replace it? A realization struck her like lightning. It wasn't her that was supposed to be taken. It was the thing pretending to be her. The loop wasn't just trapping her. It was giving her a chance to fight back. She lunged. The moment her hands touched the other Emily's wrists, the air fractured. A horrible, guttural sound escaped the thing's throat as it screamed, its body warping, unraveling like ink dissolving in water. The world shook. The loop was breaking. Emily shoved the thing backward and it fell into the darkness beyond the door. The last thing she saw was its face warping, changing into something else, something ancient, something never meant to be seen. Then, the door slammed shut. The end. When Emily opened her eyes, sunlight was pouring through the window. The clock read 7:12 a.m. She gasped, sitting upright, her fingers digging into the couch. James jolted awake beside her, his eyes immediately locking onto hers. Emily. She looked around. The apartment was normal. No flickering lights. No distorted shadows. No ringing phone. No knocking. James exhaled, running a hand down his face. Tell me it's over. Please. Emily hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. It's over. But as she stood, a strange sensation washed over her. Something felt different. She caught her reflection in the window. Her own face. Her own eyes. Her own skin. But, was it really? James was watching her carefully. Emily. A slow chill crept down her spine. Because suddenly she wasn't sure anymore. The Unseen Caller, Episode 10, the final answer. Emily Carter stood frozen, staring at her reflection in the window. The world outside was drenched in the golden hues of morning, but inside, her reality had never felt more uncertain. Her own face gazed back at her, but was it really hers? James shifted beside her. Emily. His voice was cautious, as if he, too, sensed something wasn't quite right. She turned toward him slowly, the weight of the past nights pressing into her chest. I think it's over, she said, but the words felt wrong in her mouth, like they didn't belong to her. James exhaled, relieved. Good. Because I don't think I can handle any more of this horror movie crap. Emily forced a smile, but deep down, an unease slithered through her veins. Something was still watching. Something was still waiting. The aftermath. For the next few days, Emily tried to settle back into normalcy. She went to work. She answered emails. She called her mother and pretended nothing had happened. But at night, in the quiet, she felt it. A lingering presence. A feeling of displacement, like she was out of sync with the world around her. James checked in frequently, his eyes always scanning her face, as if looking for something that wasn't there. You're sure you're okay? He asked one evening over coffee. Emily hesitated, gripping her cup tightly. Yeah. I'm fine. It was a lie. Because something was wrong. The first glitch had happened a week later. Emily was brushing her teeth, staring absently at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, when she noticed it. A lag. A tiny, almost imperceptible delay in the movement of her reflection. She blinked. No. That was impossible. She lifted her hand. Her reflection did the same. She turned her head. The reflection followed. Then, for a fraction of a second, it didn't. Emily stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she kept her gaze locked onto the mirror. Nothing was wrong. It was just a trick of the mind. Right? Her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated before reaching for it. New message from unknown, you don't belong here. Emily's blood ran cold. The confrontation James arrived within 20 minutes. Emily paced the living room, her fingers trembling as she replayed the moment in her mind. I know it sounds crazy, but my reflection, it wasn't right. It was slow. Just for a second. And then. She handed him the phone. That message. James read it, his expression darkening. You think this is part of what happened before? I don't know, Emily admitted. But I don't feel like myself. Like I'm still, in between something. James took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. Then we need answers. We need to know if you're really you. Emily swallowed hard. How? James hesitated, then reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unrolled it, Emily's breath caught. A mirror shard from the night the reflection shattered. We check, he said. And we find out. The test. They sat on the floor, the apartment silent except for the occasional hum of a passing car outside. James placed the mirror shard in front of them, its jagged edges catching the dim light. You ready? He asked. Emily's throat was dry. Yeah. She leaned forward, looking into the reflection. At first, nothing was wrong. Then her reflection smiled. But she hadn't moved. A wave of pure terror slammed into her chest. The Emily in the reflection was grinning, a slow, deliberate stretch of the lips. Her real mouth was still. Frozen. James yanked her back. Jesus Christ. He grabbed the shard, flipping it over, breaking the connection. Emily's breathing was ragged. Did you see that? Did you? James' face was pale. Yeah. I saw it. Silence stretched between them. Then James whispered, Emily, we need to fix this. Now. The replacement. The answer had been in front of them the whole time. You have to replace it, her past self had said. That was the way to break the loop. If you're not supposed to be here, James said, then maybe, we send whatever took your place back. Emily's stomach churned. And if it doesn't work? James' grip on her wrist tightened. Then we make sure it does. The final night they prepared everything. The broken mirror shard. The place where it had all begun, the bathroom. Emily stared at the cracked surface, her pulse a wild, frantic thing. What if I don't make it back? James met her eyes. Then I'll find you. The lights flickered. The air turned heavy. And Emily stepped through. The other side, the world on the other side was wrong. It was her apartment but hollow. The air felt thin, like she was standing inside a memory. And there, standing in the dark, was herself. The thing pretending to be her. The thing that had taken her place. It watched her, head tilting. You shouldn't be here. Emily stepped forward, fists clenched. Neither should you. The thing's face shifted, warping between her features and something ancient, hungry. Then, it lunged. The final choice Emily fought. She clawed. She refused to be erased. The thing screamed, thrashing as Emily forced it back toward the mirror, toward the place where it had slipped through. The room shook. Reality buckled. And with one final push she threw it through the glass. The ending. Emily woke up gasping. She was on the floor of her apartment. James was beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Emily. Are you?" She blinked. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yeah. I think so." James exhaled in relief. "Good. Because I am never doing this again." Emily laughed, but deep down, she knew the truth. She had won. She had survived. But as she glanced toward the mirror for just a second, her reflection didn't move. The end.